Okay, look at that. I think I was muted on that side.
Oh, no.
So if you missed that whole thing, well, we've got a bunch of different feeds going on in here. So we've got 3 different Instagram feeds. This is me over here on this side, Randy Fink, MD. Here's Alease the
There's
Embryologist.
me. Hey, guys.
Yep, this is New Life Fertility. And over here in the middle is Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn. And again, my name is Randy Fink, and I'm the fertility gynecologist here at New Life Fertility in Pensacola, Florida. Joining me is Alease, who is really I can't understate or I can't overstate how lucky we are to have this person here, because she is not only so well known on the internet and in fertility and in embryologic circles. She's a wonderful communicator, a great human being, and a really fantastic embryologist.
Thank you.
So very, very lucky to have you here tonight.
Yeah.
What does it take to become an embryologist? What is an embryologist?
Yeah, so the embryologist, I'll just start with what we do. We are the lab staff that help create your embryos. So we do ICSI, we do conventional insemination. We work with wonderful physicians like Dr. Fink to find eggs during an egg retrieval. We load catheters for embryo transfer. We culture embryos. We freeze them. We perform embryo biopsy. So we are the people kind of behind the scenes in the lab helping y'all, create and store and all the things with your embryos.
And you made a very excellent point at one point a couple of months ago, and that's that the front-facing view is always going to be your doctor, but the person who is behind the scenes there, who is with you every step of the way, quite literally every step of the way, is your embryologist. So, what does it take to become an embryologist?
So currently, it is a bachelor's degree in a science. So my background's in genetics and biotech from NC State. Go Pack. I know we have some Pack people listening on my live. I did all of my training on the job. So started off working with mouse embryos in the lab, starting with andro, sperm prep, all of those things, and kind of trained up into the lab. So I do think we're moving more towards master's degrees and PhDs at this point. But currently, bachelor's in a science is what is needed, and then try to get your foot in the door, entry level position.
But these are long days.
They are long days. I just worked a full day, by the way, for anyone listening. I literally just left the lab. Long days, 8, 10, 12. We had some 12-hour days, weekends, holidays. So it can be fairly intense, but I mean, we love what we do.
You might say that you are the first babysitter.
We are for very quiet daycare.
Right? Yeah, very quiet. It's nice, actually. You don't have to change diapers.
No diapers, no vomit, none of that.
That's a real plus. Let's say hi to a few people who have joined here. I see Dr. Williams is with us, who is our superb embryologist here at New Life Fertility in Pensacola. And one of these days, I will be able to get him on the program because
good luck with that.
he has been. I think he just doesn't want to sit next to me.
He likes to evade the cameras.
Okay. All right, fair enough. The Bama gal is none other than my mother in Mobile. Thanks for being here. PW3ST, oh yes, from Key Largo and now in Orlando. Fantastic. Hey to Alina. Zenny, good to see you in Miami tonight. Hey to Bren. Bren is 18 weeks tomorrow. The placenta was low-lying at 16 weeks. Should it rise? They said if it doesn't, you'll have a C-section at 36 weeks. So what you're talking about there is known as a low-lying placenta, and it is not at all uncommon to see a placenta that is placed low early on in pregnancy. Now, a low-lying placenta is different than what's known as a placenta previa. So now that I have a lovely assistant, let me demonstrate. If you could do this. Okay, well, this is kind of hard to do, but here we go. Let's say that this is the uterus, right? Here's the uterus, and the placenta sits here. The cervix is the opening to the uterus. So when it comes time to have the baby, the cervix has to dilate and open up. And obviously, if there's a placenta that's sitting over here, well, that's not going to work, right? A low-lying placenta is when the placenta sits close to the cervix, but usually as the uterus grows, this placenta will move up with it. If the placenta is implanted over the cervix, that's what's known as a placenta previa, and that's something that does require a C-section. But Bryn, I would be almost certain that your low-lying placenta is not a previa, and if that's what they called it, if they called it a low-lying placenta, that is something different, and it will almost certainly move. So good deal there. Rosa is with us. Thanks for being here yourself, my friend. Oh, look, Vic says we're both awesome. Yay! Thank you for that very, very much. Golden 1XO, you are the first person to be here tonight. Well, that is great. We got about 1,000 people there on Alease's, and we've got Angela over here. We've got Robin, and for all those folks who started out there on Instagram or LinkedIn, or rather Facebook and LinkedIn, and didn't hear audio, my apologies for that. Angela, we are happy to see you as always. Yep, the embryologist, she helped you a lot by answering her questions on TikTok.
It's been a minute slipping on TikTok, but it's good to see you.
So how do you do that? You do, so you're kind of both in the Instagram space and in the TikTok space.
Yes, I actually started on Instagram 2021. My siblings who are a little bit younger than me were the ones that were like, you should get on TikTok. That's where it's happening. So I started on TikTok after that, and that's where things kind of grew for me. But if you're back in the old days, TikTok, if you used to watch me, I used to do a TikTok live like 2 or 3 times a week. I don't know how I had time for that.
Gosh, how do you have time for that?
I don't know. Now it's all I can do to get a video.
I know it's all I can do to post once a week.
I know, it's a lot.
Yeah. It is. Angela has a really good question here about fertilization. So let's just kind of talk about the steps and what happens. So in IVF, we retrieve your eggs, and that's done typically under some anesthesia. The eggs go through the window or somehow or another into the embryology lab, and you have selected individual sperm. So in what we call ICSI, we're taking an individual sperm and placing it inside that egg. Well, so first question is, tell us about the difference between ICSI and what we know of as conventional IVF.
So ICSI is a newer type of insemination. It stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection. It was really developed for patients who have male factor infertility, who don't necessarily have the motility or the counts to have success with conventional insemination. So ICSI is where we take, like Dr. Fink said, one sperm, we're using a small needle and injecting it into the egg, versus conventional insemination, or sometimes people call it traditional insemination, is when we have an egg in a drop of media and we are adding sperm to that drop of media. So the sperm still has to swim through some outer cells, still has to kind of make its way into the egg. And so depending on, sperm parameters and previous medical history, physicians will recommend one or the other.
Now, Angela is talking about a situation where she was having a difficult time. I always get 90 to 100% fertilization, and this cycle, only 2 out of 5 mature eggs fertilized. So can you tell a difference in an egg in anything about egg quality when you're actually placing a sperm inside of it?
So sometimes we can't see DNA. So if there's, abnormal, the egg has abnormal DNA, we can't see that, but there are some morphological things that we can see when it comes to egg quality. And typically we note that in the patient's chart. And so if we do have questions like this, we have low fertilization, we have low blast development, that's something we like to relay to the physicians, and, hey, this could be a reason why, we're seeing lower fertilization or lower blast conversion rates. Sometimes, unfortunately, though, it's everything looks normal, and we didn't see anything abnormal, and we still see those results. And unfortunately, we can't see everything.
So, Angela, it's reminding me of a couple of potential scenarios. So one is, so you've done really well. You've had 90 to 100% fertilization in your other cycles, but this one was not so good. You only got a couple of eggs fertilized. Well, there are some people for whom that keeps happening, that every time they do a cycle of IVF, they don't get quality enough eggs that end up being able to be fertilized. And then we go to look the next day and they're not fertilized. And we say, gosh, we just didn't get any fertilization. Or sometimes those eggs will grow and then they'll stop the embryos will grow and then they'll stop growing. So that can be an egg quality issue. That's an ongoing problem. And that may be one reason that some people have a difficult time getting pregnant, because there is an egg issue. But sometimes also it may just be a bad day. It may have just been a bad cycle. And one of the things that we run into that's most frustrating in the IVF world is that one cycle may be completely different than another. That you may have one cycle where you do fantastic, and the next one with the exact same protocol, you do abominably for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
And we like science to be predictable, but when it pertains to the human body, it just isn't always, right?
I hate that we don't always have the answers. Yeah.
That is indeed a thing. So when we talk about looking at an embryo the next day to see that it fertilized, what does that exactly mean?
Yeah, so when we do our insemination, whether it's conventional or ICSI, it's the same for both. We are looking for signs of fertilization 17 to 19 hours post insemination. So if we're doing our insemination at 12 p.m., noon, we are looking at for fertilization at 7 a.m. the next day. And what we're looking for is 2 pronuclei, one from the sperm and one from the egg. That typically also, the fertilized egg will also throw off polar bodies, so 2 polar bodies. So sometimes we can see that, great, fertilization. Sometimes we're not seeing fertilization, but we're looking for those 2 polar bodies, 2 polar bodies and 2 pronuclei, 17 to 19 hours post-insemination.
So is there ever a time that you might look at an embryo on day 1 and it doesn't look like it's fertilized, but then couple days later, when you go to look at the other embryos on day 3, lo and behold, it had fertilized and it continued to grow? How does that happen?
Absolutely. So sometimes eggs will fertilize before that window, or they'll fertilize after that window. And so unless you have a time-lapse incubator or something that's taking a picture every 10 minutes, we're checking for fertilization once. One time, maybe it takes us 5 to 10 minutes, but we may have missed that window. Maybe that one particular egg is a little slow or a little fast. And so a lot of times we will keep those ones that we call 0 PNs, or unfertilized ones that we don't see those clear signs of fertilization. We'll keep them in culture, keep them separate, and then check them on day 3 and see if they cleave. Because there are lots of instances where we don't see fertilization on day 1, and they actually do cleave and they make embryos, they make babies. So sometimes we're just missing that window just slightly.
Well, that makes all the sense in the world. Angela asks another good question, and this is something that comes up periodically, and that's that folks hear about the use of calcium ionophore.
Oh, yes.
And they read about that on the internet and they say, oh, well, that's something I can add in. I want to use that because maybe that's going to make a difference. That's going to make a difference between me having a baby and not having a baby. So maybe I want that. And I generally caution against it because clinically speaking, there are some real specific scenarios where calcium ionophore is considered useful in the laboratory. And for me, I think about, well, it's when we get no fertilization. Yeah. But how does calcium ionophore work? What is that? How do you do it? Do you just take a dropper and put it in, or mixing up bubbling things with smoke and stuff coming out?
So it's actually, I've only used calcium ionophore one time. So it's not very common. Usually, like Dr. Fink said, it's for patients where we're seeing no fertilization at all, complete failed fertilization, and it is used for oocyte activation. And I believe it is put in the media. You may know more than I do because I've only used it like once. Like I said, only one time. It's not common. It's not often that we use it. But it is for oocyte activation, and we use it for completely failed fertilization, which is rare.
So basically what it's doing is kind of waking up eggs that might not otherwise be awake. That's kind of the way I think about it. But the problem with it is, so there's a couple of things. First, most labs don't keep it in stock because it has a very limited shelf life. And once it's opened, very quickly, it has to be used or thrown out. So typically it has to be ordered in advance. So it's not something that you can ask about kind of on the day of your retrieval. And instead, it's something that, we kind of need to know about. But also, it may actually harm good eggs. And so therefore, we kind of want to limit it to the situations where we know it's going to work. And I see that you're saying the nurse suggested I use it. Well, in some programs, there are folks making recommendations that may not have a full picture of the clinical scenario. She says it won't hurt. It can only help. And I don't agree with that, because calcium ionophore actually can hurt an otherwise healthy and normal egg. So really it's best used in situations where the eggs are not activated and you have a history of having zero fertilization. It sounds like in your situation here, and I know that you've had a lot of cycles of IVF where you've done really well, but in this one particular cycle you didn't. I would say that that's probably your outlier. That's probably something that just, didn't work the way it was supposed to. Your body's trying to make its own rules. So tell it to stop, Angela, would you? You know what? It needs to read the book. That's the way it's supposed to go. Rosa is pregnant now, and Rosa has really bad insomnia in the 3rd trimester. Waking up like you haven't slept at all. What's the reason? Well, you got a lot going on in there, Rosa. You're in the 3rd trimester. You got a lot of, you got a person that's in there. And so the body is definitely changing. Your hormones are changing. You've got a lot of space that's being occupied that wasn't before, but really the blood flow that's kind of going back into your heart has dramatically increased, and the work that the heart has to do to pump that blood through the rest of the body has significantly increased. And so that takes a lot more energy. Your own energy expenditure goes up when you're pregnant. Plus, you're just not as comfortable. Some of the hormones are making your nose kind of stuffy.
That's what I was going to say. I keep hearing the snoring is common.
Snoring is a thing. It's the struggle is real, my friend. Yeah. And you become somewhat obstructed in the way you're breathing. And so that may decrease some of the oxygen you're getting, giving you restful sleep. So it's just kind of a more uncomfortable situation. What can you do about that? I do think melatonin is fine to use in pregnancy, and Unisom is fine to use in pregnancy. In fact, Unisom we use pretty routinely in the 1st trimester as a treatment for nausea. It's very, very helpful, and has been extensively studied, so we know that it is safe. Now, it's not something that I would want you to use every night for the rest of your pregnancy, but certainly I think that's worth a look. There are also some things, interestingly enough, that you can do for your brain. And we've talked about this before when we're talking about dealing with the stress associated with fertility treatments. And that is an app that is called NuCalm, Nucalm. NuCalm is and there is a discount code that goes along with it. And I believe the discount code is SLEEP15. That's SLEEP15. And what that does is that it's a sound that you listen to. And you may have seen other apps that have different sounds that are supposed to help you to sleep. This one physically puts your brain waves into sleep mode, and you can sleep all night long. Cool. It will make a measurable difference in the restfulness of your sleep. And so I really very strongly recommend it, not just for pregnancy, but for anyone, and particularly folks who are dealing with different kinds of stressors.
Now, what about magnesium? So that's one that I've taken in the past. It's not like melatonin where it like helps you fall asleep, but I did feel like over time it helped with sleep. What are your thoughts on that?
Some people say that magnesium is helpful for sleep or for anxiety, and there are some scenarios where it helps. You may feel that you get a little more restful sleep with it. It is likely not to be harmful, and so that's not a bad thing either. And the other thing that may be helpful there too is some extra vitamin D, because vitamin D is also associated with increasing the amount of restful sleep. So yeah.
I didn't know that. Cool.
All right, so we talked about fertilizing an egg, and then you look at it the next day and you see that it's become an embryo. Mm-hmm. Well, what happens after it's an embryo? Do you have to sing to it? Do you have to, does it start coloring with crayons or markers, or how does it grow, and what's the next step when you're looking at an embryo?
Yeah, well, we do play music in the lab. I get that question a lot. Like, what do you guys listen to? All sorts of stuff. Today we were Disney Channel 2000s hits, if I have any 2000s babies out there. Hannah Montana, some other stuff. But typically after fertilization, the embryos are sitting in a culture media that has all the nutrients it needs to grow. So protein, sugars, salt, all of those things. it sits in that media for 5 to 7 days, and then we're checking for development in certain parts of that, growth phase. So day 3 is one that we talked about where we're looking at cleavage. We want to see the cells dividing. And then typically they divide so much, they're dividing very quickly that by day 5, 6, or 7, we're seeing a blastocyst stage embryo that has kind of 2 distinct features, the part that will become the baby and the part that will become the placenta.
And before we talk a little bit more about that, I want to say a special hello to Eileen. If you are still on there, very special hello to my old friend there who has managed to get herself pregnant, and we are all so happy for you.
Good.
Yes, congratulations, Eileen.
That's awesome.
God has smiled upon you. Indeed. So we talk about the difference between that day 3 embryo, which we call a cleavage stage embryo, and the blastocyst. So there are some programs who will transfer only blastocysts, and some will say, yep, there are circumstances where you can transfer a day 3 embryo. The way I describe the difference with a blast is that it has gone from a group of cells that are just trying to figure out how to divide and have become a functioning little metabolic factory. So in a day 3 embryo, you have about how many cells?
6 to 8 is kind of the goal. Anywhere around there.
Whereas a blastocyst is going to have about how many cells?
100, 150, somewhere around there.
So you've gone from 6 to 8 cells to 150 cells in the course of 2 days.
Yeah, that's very fast.
Yeah, that is fast growing. So if you were to look at that, would you be able to see that divide, those cells dividing? If you were looking at, certainly with a time lapse, you could. But,
yes.
But if you sat there and stared at it under the microscope, would you actually see that cell division?
No, it'd be cool if we could. We
cool.
try to keep them in the incubator as much as possible, right? So when we're taking them out, we do it very quickly. And so unfortunately, we're not usually looking at them long enough to actually see some cells divide. But I'm sure at any point in time, some of them are about to do it.
So as they divide, nowadays there is kind of a big movement towards taking pictures of embryos, and they call that an embryoscope, right?
Yes.
How does that thing work?
Yeah. So time lapse, hey, you got to put in a good word for us to get one here.
We're hopefully getting one.
I want one.
Yeah.
Essentially what the time-lapse incubator does is it will take a picture of the embryo every 10 minutes. So that would be equivalent of us taking the dish out of the incubator for every single patient every 10 minutes, which is just, there's no way we're going to be able to do that. There's no way. Exactly. So it gives us a lot more information about embryo development than what we've previously had before time lapse. So it gives us a lot more information. It gives you as a patient more information, and it gives the provider a lot more information on, hey, we're actually seeing a rest right here, or this embryo actually kind of reverted back to a previous state. We've seen lots of very interesting things, and there's a lot of really cool research studies and data that's coming out using time-lapse incubation.
Well, so one of the things I think that's most exciting about time-lapse incubation is that, they're trying to be able to look at different features of growth that happen that would be missed by the naked eye, because not only can you not see them because they're slow enough, but because, again, that embryo is in culture. It's in a little incubator, so you can't keep taking it out. That would hurt it, right?
Yeah.
And so if a camera is watching that and some kind of computer or AI is looking at all those little features, is there something that you can figure out from looking at an embryo, the way it's growing or developing, that will make it more or less likely to be a normal embryo? Will we be able to tell that without having to do that whole biopsy and PGT thing? And so that's, I think, where the science is going. I think it's really fascinating.
I think in the next, we're so close.
Really?
We're very close. I say in the next 3 to 5 years, AI will be better at choosing an embryo than we will. I don't think we're there yet. I haven't been convinced. Other people may say differently, but I think we're really, really close.
It's in the works.
Yeah.
It's definitely in the works. Hey to Andre, thank you for being here. And Emily, RPO mom,
girl.
Good evening. And a very special hello to Angelina Foxy, one of the finest nurse practitioners in the entire well, I guess I could say Midwest. In Minnesota, is that the Midwest?
Oh yeah,
so the Northwest.
Yeah, North Midwest.
Okay. And those cold parts of the country. Really one
And
of
I've
the
got
finest
Allison
there.
over there. She is
Allison.
a reproductive attorney, which is awesome.
Oh,
And
that's
Dr. Kane
fantastic, Doctor. Well, good. Thank
down
you so
in
much
Charlotte,
for
North
being
Carolina.
here. Well, we're very
Yeah.
honored to have you guys with us here tonight. You know, another question that people often ask me about, because when we talk about it, it sounds so esoteric, but you're going to freeze the embryo. So it gives people some notion that you're like popping them into a little ice tray and sticking them in the freezer. And obviously that's not what's happening, because a little bit of water in a cell can really hurt it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So how do you get even the last little iota of water out of something that you can't even see with the naked eye?
So we use the term freezing often, but it's actually not freezing. It's vitrification, which is different than freezing. So like Dr. Fink mentioned, our goal with vitrification is to remove as much liquid and water as we can to avoid the formation of ice crystals. So we do that by putting the embryos in different concentrations of sugar. And that removes the water from the embryo, the fluid, any fluid, and that's replaced with cryoprotectant media. And then we rapidly vitrify it in liquid nitrogen. So it's really in more of a glass-like state than it is frozen. And it happens very fastly.
Let's translate that. So first thing you do, you make a little nick, and then you take out the water somehow.
Yes.
How do you take out the water?
That is with our ES solution.
Okay, so a solution basically replaces the water with something that will protect it when it freezes, and then it becomes almost like it's in glass.
Almost, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, and then it goes into a little straw, right?
It goes on to, I wish I had one with me. I could have showed you.
Man.
I could have showed you one. It's on a really skinny straw that has kind of a paddle at the end, and we can see it under the microscope. We use a little tiny stripper, what we call a stripper tip, to load the embryo, and then we place it right into liquid nitrogen. The whole process takes about 10 minutes.
And so when you go to thaw an embryo, thawing an embryo is also not the same as cracking an ice tray and taking something out and plopping it on a dish.
Exactly.
There's a whole process. There
is a whole process. And so when we thaw an embryo, we actually call that warming now with the new terminology, since we've moved from freezing and we're into vitrification. It's basically the reverse of what we did for vitrification. We are placing it in a warmed media that has a high concentration of sugar, and then we get rid of that cryoprotectant media that it's been frozen on, and we slowly decrease the amount of sugar in the solutions that we're walking the embryos through, placing the embryos in, to rehydrate the embryo after we've sucked all the water and the fluid out from vitrification.
So you literally then see it expand.
It usually takes longer than you think. So it's usually a couple hours. So when you guys get your pictures on embryo transfer day, sometimes they're all shriveled up. That is completely normal. A lot of people are like, oh my gosh, why does it look so shriveled? That's normal. That is because before we freeze them, we want them to collapse to get rid of all of that water, right? So sometimes when we're thawing them and we take that picture, we take it right after the thaw. We take it right after that process. And so it usually takes a little bit of time to re-expand and kind of, get all of that water back in, wake up a little bit. So sometimes the pictures are misleading.
Well, so best case scenario, how long does it take to thaw an embryo?
2 minutes.
Oh, so it's
very fast. It's the actual thawing process is very quick, but the re-expansion process is what can take a little bit longer. So the process of thawing, we pretty much know in 5 minutes or so whether the embryo has survived the thawing process, but it can take a little time for it to re-expand post-thaw.
Now, we know that clinically, even if I transfer your embryo and it's still a bit collapsed, it's going to continue to expand and grow on the inside. So it doesn't have to be fully expanded to go back in. And every program will do a little bit differently. But let's just say that, we're planning to do your embryo transfer at 2:00 in the afternoon. What time would most laboratories start working on warming those embryos?
I'd say most are 2 to 3 hours prior to your embryo transfer time. It really depends on workflow of the day. So sometimes they may do it a little bit earlier. Sometimes they may do it a little bit closer to your time of transfer. But most are wanting 2 to 3 hours to get a little time in the culture media, to start to re-expand. But like you said, there are many times that we transfer them still collapsed and we don't see any difference in clinical pregnancies.
The body does what
Yes.
it's supposed to do. If you are just joining, we're so happy to have you here this Tuesday evening, as we are as I am anyway, every Tuesday evening at 5 o'clock Central Time. My name is Dr. Randy Fink, and this is Fertility with Fink, live from Pensacola, Florida, at New Life Fertility. And with me here is Alease the Embryologist. Please follow her Instagram because she is a dynamo.
And y'all who are watching on my page, if you haven't followed Dr. Fink, definitely check him out. He's got awesome content. And we create content together when I'm here. We have a great time.
Yes, we do. That's Randy Fink, MD. And thank you for the plug there. I appreciate that. Hey to Reagan, nice to see you this evening. And Tracy down in Miami, Erica, Alyssa, nice to see you here as well. I saw that Angela, I'm so glad that you were able to get in touch with the psychic because she's wonderful, and that was I'm glad to hear that. It's a little off the embryology topic here, but we were talking a couple of weeks ago about just really about dealing with stress and about dealing with some of the unknowns, and a wonderful old soul I know by the name of Alexis in Miami, and that's Alexis's Psychic Boutique is the website for her, and I'm so glad that was meaningful for you, Angela. Glad to hear that. So thawing embryos. People would say, well, gosh, isn't that dangerous? Isn't it dangerous to freeze them and thaw them? But nowadays we're so successful with cryopreserving embryos. What would you say is generally the success rate in thawing or in warming a frozen embryo?
Yeah, so it's very clinic dependent. It can be dependent on embryo quality and things like that too. But I'd say most clinics have a survival rate of 98, 99%. We have come very far in our ability to cryopreserve embryos. So the risk is fairly low. With everything we do, there is a risk. I like people to know that. Every single procedure has a risk, but for pretty much all of them, the risk is fairly low. The embryos can also be stored for pretty much indefinitely. I mean, I don't know if you saw the article that there was
born from an embryo that was 30 something years ago.
Yes.
And that's really actually a marvel because we have come a very long way when it comes to cryopreserving embryos. Probably even since you've started doing this, you've seen huge differences. But I would say back in the early days of IVF, embryo thaw survival rates were probably in the 70 to 75% kind of range. And now, it's a rare day indeed that an embryo doesn't survive the thaw. If an embryo weren't to survive, do you think that has more to do with the way it's warmed or because of something that might have gone awry when it was actually frozen?
I think it could be either. So the media that we freeze embryos in can be toxic if the embryo is left in that media for too long. But the media that we thaw the embryo in can also be toxic if we've left it in there for too long. And then embryo quality comes into play as well. So there's a lot of factors involved, but I usually lean more towards the cryopreservation side only because that's the side with the cryoprotectant media. And we have a very short amount of time for them to be in that media before things can kind of go downhill. But yeah, like you said, it's very, very rare for that to happen. And embryo quality can be a concern there too, if we're freezing poor quality.
Well, let's talk about that embryo biopsy thing. Oh, look here. I'm going to unplug here because I just heard there was no sound over there.
Oh.
So you know what I'm going to do? Just in case there's sound issues, hold that there for me. I'm going to take that mic out. So hopefully you can hear us here again. When you biopsy an embryo, when an embryo is biopsied, people often worry, oh gosh, well, maybe they're going to be taking a piece of my baby's arm. I don't want that biopsy. Maybe that's going to hurt my baby. I don't want it to accidentally, take out an eyeball or something like that. But there are different parts of an embryo, and you can tell from looking at that embryo. And so what are those two parts? What are they called?
So in the blastocyst stage of development, we are looking at two different things. The ICM, which stands for inner cell mass, that's what becomes the fetus, becomes the baby. And then we have the trophectoderm, and that is what becomes the placenta. So we've got those two parts of the embryo. We can easily visualize that under the microscope. And so when we remove cells for genetic testing, we are actually removing cells from the part of the embryo that becomes the placenta. So we remove 5 to 7 cells using a laser, which sounds scary, but I promise it's not, and send those cells off for diagnostic testing.
So you're using a laser.
We are.
On the embryo.
We are. Even if you're not doing PGT testing, we're often using a laser too.
So it's the portion of the cell or portion of the embryo that's becoming the placenta.
Correct.
Not the portion that's becoming a baby. Yeah. Is that a hard skill to learn, how to biopsy an embryo? Because how do you hold on to it?
Yeah. So under the microscope, I've got some videos of this on my page. We use really small needles, like tiny. In the video, they look huge, but in real life, they're like, you can't really see them. And we have a needle on 2 sides. We use like these joysticks. It's almost a little bit like a video game. And we have joysticks that control the needle. So we have one side that holds the embryo and the other side that we remove has needles that we remove the cells with. So it's pretty cool stuff. I will say it's a little harder to learn, but.
Is it clamping on the embryo or is it a vacuum?
It's suction. So we use suction to hold the zona, which is the outer shell of the embryo. Your embryo actually has to hatch out of that shell or that zona to implant. So we're holding on to that, and it uses suction. So we also have like a device that allows us to control the suction. So not too much, not too little, just enough.
Now, back, not even too long ago, I would see embryologists with a little straw in there.
Yeah.
Was that providing the suction?
It was. So that is mouth pipetting, which we do not do anymore.
Okay.
It is so. If you are if you are CAP accredited, you are not allowed to mouth pipette. I have seen people mouth pipette before. It's very interesting. You can't talk to them obviously because they're mouth pipetting, but really it's a mouthpiece that has a long tube attached to it. And there's filter, like you'd have to suck up the whole dish of media to actually suck it into your mouth. I promise.
Media is never flavored, right? Yeah.
No, but I actually have tried media.
It's probably sugary, right?
It tastes a little salty.
Salty. Yeah, okay.
But I've heard thawing media, because it's got such a high sugar content, tastes like Kool-Aid. That's what someone told me.
Well, okay. Maybe we'll try that sometime.
Yeah, we'll do a little shot of media.
Yeah, interesting.
Tastes like ocean water.
Like a little saline.
Yeah, like you're at the beach.
When the embryos are frozen and they're put into a big kind of cryo tank, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't have to worry so much about the power going out, do you?
No. Now, when we have monitoring on our tanks that monitor the temperature or the weight or there's lots of different ways you can monitor your tanks. Now that is connected to electricity, but we have generators. So most clinics, I would say like almost all of them. I don't want to say all of them, but
most would have backups.
Exactly. Right. Have backups and generators if something were to, power to go off, things like that. We also get alerts. So if something were to happen, it's calling people and the lab director is rushing to the lab and we're doing all of the things. So
figure out what is going on.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly there. Let's talk a little bit about sperm because, the idea of being able to sit down under a microscope and to select one single sperm from somebody's 50 million
I know,
sperm
it's crazy.
Is really, it's a hard thing to kind of wrap your mind around. So how do you get used to looking at that?
I don't know. You see a lot of cases. So what we do is we actually wash the sperm first. So we're getting rid of any sperm that's not moving. We get rid of abnormally shaped sperm. And so by the time we're actually looking at it in our dish, it's kind of gone through some processing. And so we're, the goal is to be looking at the best of the best sperm at that point. We also use a solution called PVP. It slows down the sperm because they swim really fast, right? And we got to be able to catch them. So what PVP does is slows them down so we can see the shape, we can see how they swim, and any other features that we want to look at. And that allows us to choose kind of the best looking sperm for a patient.
Now, sometimes there's also a situation where the sperm just don't appear to be moving. They seem to be sleeping.
Yeah.
Can you give them a shot of espresso or something to wake them up?
We can. So there's a solution called pentoxyphylline. I call it Pentox or Pentoxy for short. It wakes them up a little bit. If patients have, so non-motile sperm does not equate to dead sperm. So just because the sperm isn't moving doesn't mean it's dead, which is why we don't say dead, we say non-motile. But we can add pentoxy to non-motile sperm and actually see which ones are alive and moving and which ones are actually dead.
So that's the point. If looking at a sample of sperm, we want to put a live sperm, obviously, together with an egg. If we're going to fertilize an egg, we want that live sperm to be there. So the only way you can see that it is a live sperm is by its movement or by its swimming. But if it looks like it's sleeping, that's what the pentoxy is for. It kind of wakes it up a little bit, and that way you can know it's moving. Hi, Andre asks, what are your thoughts about Zymot in general, or Zymote as it may be pronounced, and particularly Zymot in a donor bank sperm?
I love the Zymote device. The Zymote chip. I wish I had my keys with me. I have a Zymote keychain. It's a little chip, maybe this big, that has a membrane on top of it that processes sperm in a different way than centrifugation, which is like a big spinning wheel. The sperm kind of goes to the bottom. And the goal of the Zymote and devices like it are to minimize the amount of sperm that get through that have DNA fragmentation. So it's very easy for us to use in the lab. So I love using them. It's so easy. I don't think there's anything wrong with Zymote. If your clinic offers it, I don't think it's a bad option. If sperm quality is something you're concerned about, typically with sperm bank sperm, our concerns with sperm are lower because they've gone through a whole vetting process and the counts and the whole thing, and they have guarantees. But if it's something that you're concerned about and something that you're willing to pay for, that I think it's...
Yeah, the way I think of Zymote, my mind is much simpler. And that is, it's a little obstacle course.
Yeah.
And you put sperm on one end of the obstacle course and you let them run the obstacle course, and the best ones come out first on the other side. So you're just selecting, you're still going to select, the embryologist is still going to select an individual sperm, but they're selecting from what should theoretically be a stronger group of sperm.
Yes. That's a good way to put it. The obstacle course. I'm going to steal that.
There you go. Now, in some programs like ours here, we have a different way of doing that. We have our own sort of built and validated obstacle course. Zymote is a commercial brand that typically clinics will upcharge to use. The obstacle course that we use for sperm here is included in the price. But say, for instance, where I used to work, and many of you know me from there, the price for the Zymote is about $200. So it's pretty nominal in the grander scheme of things. If it were $2,000, I'd say, well, where's the evidence for that extra $2,000? Is it giving us more babies? Is it giving us fewer miscarriages? Is it, what's it really doing for us? But for $200, I think it's reasonable and it might help.
Yeah.
But again, your issue there is with donor sperm. Theoretically should have better sperm. Now, all sperm banks, in my opinion, are not equal.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
What's been your experience with that?
There are a handful that, I like to have patients that are kind of top of the list. There are a handful that are like, okay, middle of the list. And there's a handful that like, we will not accept sort of thing. There are, some that clinics will not accept.
And we won't talk about them.
I was just going to say, you can DM us if
you really want to know. I saw a nice little comment here on your Instagram that came from IVF Manifest.
Yes, hello.
Love seeing you and Dr. Fink together. Loved meeting you both at ASRM.
It was great to meet you too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I will not be at ASRM this year.
No, you won't. I will be going this year, not for the entire time. I know some of y'all who know me know that we do the social media summit every year. There will not be a social media summit this year.
I didn't know that.
Yes, but we are working on some other really great get-togethers for ASRM. So I won't be there on Sunday. I have a wedding that I'm going to be in, but I'll be there for the rest of the day. So I'm hoping to see some of y'all again this year.
I didn't know. Why won't there be a summit this year?
It is
yes. Because of one of those things.
Yes, one of those things. There's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes, but we're gonna see what else. We're working on some other fun things during the to Congress.
Well, let's talk about some of the kind of clinical things that you might see in the laboratory that our folks at home may run into. One of the things that is really a tragedy that happens is in the case of what we clinically call a blighted ovum. And a blighted ovum is what we know of as an anembryonic pregnancy. So in other words, what happens is that there is that inner cell mass and there is that trophectoderm. So there's a placenta and there's an inner cell mass. And when they implant together, they grow together. But sometimes the placenta can grow in the absence of that inner cell mass. In other words, there's really no baby in it. But so sometimes this happens because just in nature, because of the egg, because of a chromosomal abnormality in the egg, and the embryo doesn't actually grow. Do you see things like that in the lab? Can you look at an embryo and say, wow, there's a big missing piece here? What can you see grossly? Yeah. And actually what that leads into is I want to talk a little bit about embryo grading because that's something everybody wants to ask about. But what do you see when you look at an embryo? Can you see a piece that's missing?
Yeah. So when we are evaluating embryos for biopsy or freezing or transfer, we are looking for those two pieces. We're looking for that ICM and we're looking for that trophectoderm, and we give them a grade, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But if we see an embryo that's missing one piece or the other, most of the time an embryo has a trophectoderm and it could be missing an ICM. So it doesn't have the part of the embryo that's going to become the baby. Those are not embryos that we would typically freeze or biopsy or transfer because we know they're missing a really important part of the process, part of the embryo.
Is it possible that an embryo would be missing something like an intercellular mass and you couldn't see that?
It's possible, but unlikely. It's possible, unlikely. Usually their labs are very collaborative. So if I had, like Dr. Williams today, our lab director, if there's an embryo that I'm like, I'm not sure about this one. It's disorganized. I'm not seeing very clearly the two parts of the embryo. Can you come look with me? What do you think? Let's roll it around a little bit. Let's see it from a different angle, because these are 3D, right? But we're looking at it at 2D. So we may have to roll it around. Maybe it's on the backside and we just can't see it. So there's a lot of collaboration involved. But usually, I'm trying to think of an instance where I haven't been able to tell. Usually if we can't see it, it's not there. And it's not there.
So what is your sort of general opinion about embryo grading? Do you think embryo grading is anything more really than a beauty contest?
It is mostly a beauty contest. It's very subjective. There are many times where I see embryos that I'm like, there is no way this embryo is going to make a baby. It is not very pretty. This is not the first embryo I would choose. And that's the one that makes the baby. It happens all the time. So what I typically tell people is if the embryologist thought that the embryo was good enough to freeze, because there are plenty that we say doesn't have an ICM, it doesn't have this or that, we're not going to freeze it. But if it was good enough for us to freeze, we think it's good enough to transfer. We think it's worth transferring.
And I would agree with that. We see, and you may know, because if you've done PGT testing before, you may have embryos that are graded in all manner of things. You've got your beautiful, highly graded embryos. You have your poorly graded embryos, and I hate to call them that because it gives them a complex. You don't want to start them off with those kinds of feelings that early in life. But you may find that your poorest graded embryo is your chromosomally normal embryo, whereas your highly graded embryo turned out to be not chromosomally normal. So I think embryo grading probably originally was developed so that people could try to look at an embryo and come up with a nomenclature scale to say, is this going to be a normal embryo or not? Well, it turns out that is not so reliable. It's not so predictable. So when you say it's very subjective, do you mean that one embryologist could look at an embryo and call it one thing while another embryologist would say it's something completely different?
Exactly. That's exactly what it means. It's also can be subjected to the other embryos in the dish. So for example, we've got 3 embryos in a dish. The first one I look at and I'm like, this is the best embryo I've seen all day. I'm going to give it the top quality grade. The next embryo I look at, This one's actually better than the first one. How is that even possible? The first one was just so beautiful, but this one is better. So if I'm going to go select this embryo, I want to choose this one first because it's actually better than the first one. I'm going to downgrade that first embryo and make the second one a higher grade. But does that mean that first embryo, is bad? No, it's because this one looks better than the one that I just saw. So it's very subjective.
Embryologist magic.
Yeah. It's very subjective and
I think that's an important thing for people to understand that it may change depending on who's looking at it. Now, so when we talk about an embryo grade, we've got a number and we've got 2 letters. First of all, what's that number mean?
Yeah, so the number is based on the expansion of the embryo. And when we're looking at expansion, we talked about that shell, the zona, right? The shell kind of around the embryo. As the embryo grows and matures, it gets bigger and bigger and pushes on that shell. So that shell gets thinner and thinner, and the cavity that the embryo creates gets larger and larger. And eventually it hatches out of that shell, right? So we give the expansion, how mature the embryo is, a number 1 through 6. 3s, 4s are probably the most common. 5s in there too. 5 is when we start to see them hatch out. Have you ever seen pictures of embryos where it almost looks like they're splitting into 2? It's like pinched in the middle.
A little volcano.
Right. Or a little infinity sign or something. Yeah. Exactly. That is the embryo actually hatching out of the zona. It's not splitting into twins. I get that question a lot. And then once that shell, it has hatched completely out of that shell or that zona, that is a 6. So 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s are fairly common. I don't really like to think of them as good or bad in terms of expansion. That to me is more of an indication of maturity than anything else. And the research they're all about the same pregnancy rate. And then we get into the ICM and perfected.
Is an embryo that is fully hatched, let's say a grade 6, the number is a 6, meaning it's fully hatched. Is that embryo any more fragile?
Yes. Yeah. So when we talk about pregnancy rates, we actually do see some data on pregnancy rates being slightly lower with fully hatched or grade 6 embryos. And that's because they are more fragile. That zona, that shell around the embryo, helps protect it from some of that cryoprotectant media, from some of the manipulation we're doing to them. And so they can be more likely to have cryo damage. And so we try to avoid 6s at all costs. We don't want to create 6s.
Sure.
That's kind of something we try to avoid.
Well, so then we've got the 2 letters. One letter represents, you said, the ICM, the inner cell mass, and the other represents the trifecta.
Yeah.
And so how do those letters work?
Yeah, so it's graded just like you are in school. A is good, B is fair, and C is poor. That first letter corresponds with the ICM, and the second letter is the one with the trifectoderm. And really, for the ICM, we're looking for a nice sized ICM, nice and compacted. We want it kind of like a ball. We don't want it kind of spread out. And the embryo is actually smart enough to say, I think this cell is abnormal. I'm going to get rid of it. And it will throw off abnormal cells. And so we don't want to see a lot of that around the ICM because it's telling us, hey, the embryo itself is saying something is wrong. It's throwing off these cells. And so, like I said, we grade those A, B, and C.
So that A is more compact, B is getting less compact, and C is not compact.
Not compact, too small, non-existent at all, that sort of thing.
All right. And then the other letter is for the trifectoderm. And so remember that trifectoderm is the part that becomes the placenta. What do you see with that, and how do you grade those?
I always tell people a cobblestone. If you've ever seen a cobblestone street, that's very similar to what it looks like. We want to see a lot of cells. We don't want to see bald spots in the embryo. So if you're on the street and someone's digging up the cobblestone, that's not what we want to see. We want to see nice, even cell coverage. Again, we don't want to see a lot of extruded cells. So we don't want to see the embryo pushing out too many cells. Nice looking cells.
Now, the one thing you said that bothers me is that you said, well, we've all gone to school, right? So we know grade A, B, and C. Well, I think really when you are in school, because we've all gone to high school, we know that, well, if you got an A, then you did better than most of the people in your class. And if you got a C, then you did about as well as I did, or, right? And so we are really graded where we are relative to the other people in the class with those numbers.
Yes.
And really, I think that embryo grading because you have a higher graded embryo, again, it doesn't mean that it's a better embryo. Would you
Yeah,
agree?
I would agree. And so when I
It's
say
just a pretty
yes,
embryo.
and so when I say good, fair, poor, that is based just solely on SARTs and Gardner grading scale. So it is not, to me, that is very different than what we will transfer and how we view embryos. But that is just the textbook.
Well, then here's a controversial question, because if we're going to say we have untested embryos, and we're going to say, well, which one should we transfer?
Mhm.
The embryologist is always going to look at the one that appears to be the highest rated and say, that's the prettiest one, we should transfer that one. Why is that?
Because it's the prettiest. I was just going to say it's the prettiest, and some of it is what we, not saying that because we've done it forever is how we should always do it, but the embryologists that come before us is how they did it, and they pass it down to us, and that's how we do it. And we like to choose the pretty ones. We choose the pretty ones, but that does not mean that like I said, this does not mean that your embryo that you're concerned about grade-wise is not going to make a baby, because I have seen some beautiful babies come from embryos that
absolutely.
I'm like, I don't know.
100%. And the one other thing I just want to ask, kind of about sperm, is because we're talking a lot about embryos,
Mm-hmm.
and so there are a lot of folks who are involved here who are doing IVF, but everybody doesn't do IVF.
Oh, yeah.
IUI, and even just timed intercourse is a thing, but when you are preparing sperm in the lab, let's say for an IUI, what does that mean, preparing sperm? How do you wash sperm? How do you give them a shower? What does
exactly.
that mean?
So essentially what we do is we have media, similar media to what we use in the embryology lab. We are adding that media to the raw ejaculate sperm, and then we put it in a centrifuge. So with the centrifuge, it concentrates all of the actual sperm. So sperm is very different than semen or ejaculate. Semen includes all the fluids, the round cells, all of the other things. But the centrifuge allows us to separate the actual sperm into a pellet at the bottom of the tube. And then the rest, the ejaculate and kind of the junk, sits at the top. And so we can remove that and add more media and more nutrients to the sperm and kind of separate the sperm from the ejaculate. Clean it up.
One of the things that is in, let's say, unprepared sperm is a high degree of a chemical in the body that's known as prostaglandin. Mm-hmm. Prostaglandin is what makes you cramp.
Yes.
And so if we do unwashed sperm, if we do an insemination with unwashed sperm, typically what happens is that the woman will pretty quickly get a very, very severe cramp, really a spasm of the uterus. And that's probably less than ideal when you're trying to get pregnant and trying to get sperm to work its way, into the fallopian tubes. But so that's one very obvious thing that gets washed out from that sperm.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. If you don't follow Alease the Embryologist, that is her Instagram handle. ALEASE is the name, Alease the Embryologist. And she is a wonderful, wonderful person to have in your world. So pay attention to her and sign up with her. My name is Randy Fink, Dr. Randy Fink from New Life Fertility here in Pensacola, Florida. And my Instagram is Randy Fink MD. We've got New Life Fertility. We've got LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. We're just all over the place.
It's like so many things to look at.
I just want to say what I'm fond of saying every week, that if you're involved in this process, it is not the book of your life. This is really just a chapter. And what are we here to do? We are here to rewrite it together. So every day forward with kindness. There's not enough kindness in the world. Would you agree?
I agree.
Every day forward with love, and really every day forward with hope, knowing that tomorrow is a new day full of all new adventures. So until next week, thank you so much, Alease, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Fink in Pensacola. We'll see you next week, Tuesday evening at 5 o'clock Central. Good night.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
So many to sound like a weatherman. 5 o'clock Central.